The collar still hung around Max's neck, a symbol of every life he had protected. Each scratch on the tag whispered stories of loyalty, bravery, and battles survived. But now, in the quiet of Sarah's home, the hero lay still, his breathing shallow, his eyes dulled. She had noticed it first in his walk, a stumble, then a limp, then something far worse. The vet's voice was firm. Emergency surgery. Or Max might not make it through the week. But time was vanishing, and so were the funds. As Sarah held Max's collar in her palm, she remembered every door he charged through, every child he shielded, every time he had protected her. Now, the dog who had never backed down from danger was fading, quietly, painfully, and no one else even knew. Would he survive long enough to wear his vest again? Like, share, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. We'd love to know. The collar still hung around Max's neck, even though the job was over. It was the same one he'd worn for years on duty. Scuffed, faded, with a tag shaped like a badge. Most dogs would have gladly traded it for rest. Not Max. He had always lived by the sound of zippers, the thud of boots, and the sudden snap of a leash. But now the house was silent. Sarah had retired 3 months earlier. The precinct sent flowers. Her badge was boxed up. But the only thing that felt like a real ending was Max, sleeping beside the front door, eyes open but not alert. She noticed it one morning as she poured his food. He didn't move, not even when the bag rustled. No tail wag, no bark, just a heavy, still breath. The change had been creeping in. At first, it was subtle. He missed a stare or stopped halfway through the backyard patrol he insisted on doing. Then came the limp. She assumed it was joint stiffness, a normal part of aging. But this limp didn't go away. It deepened. Some nights, he couldn't lift himself from the floor. He would lie there, staring at the door like it owed him something. Sarah wrapped the old vest in her arms. It still smelled like the back seat of the cruiser and the summer heat of long stakeouts. She had almost put it away weeks ago, but Max wouldn't let her. Every time she tried to box it, he'd drag it back out. The vest was his mission. Without it, he had no role, no orders, no purpose. One evening, Max staggered, trying to stand, and collapsed beside the couch. Not asleep, unconscious. Sarah's voice cracked as she called the vet. The ride over was wordless. Max didn't lift his head. At the clinic, Dr. Malik ran tests quickly, urgently. The diagnosis came back like a punch. Internal bleeding from a ruptured organ. Probably a slow-developing tear worsened by years of physical exertion. He would need surgery, and soon. Without it, he had days. Maybe less. The cost wasn't small. Retirement didn't come with health coverage for dogs. There were no pensions for canines. And Sarah, scraping by on a modest check, faced an impossible timeline. Dr. Malik promised to give her a few days to decide. But even he looked unsure. That night, Max lay in the corner of the living room, blanket tucked beneath him. Sarah sat beside him, hand resting on his collar. She could feel the tag's edges, smoothed by time, nicked by fights, pressed against doors he had broken down to save others. This was the dog who had run into chaos without hesitation, who had once shielded a child from a violent suspect by throwing himself into danger. Now he was slipping away in silence, and no one even knew. Would she find a way to save him in time? The morning light crept across the hardwood floor, catching the shine of Max's collar where he lay unmoving. Sarah hadn't slept. She sat slumped in the kitchen chair, the vet's words replaying in her mind on a loop. Emergency surgery. Critical. Time is short. The terms swirled together like smoke, choking her. She looked at Max and felt something crack inside her. For 12 years, he had been her partner. Not just a dog, he was the second set of eyes in every raid. The silent backup who never missed a cue. Max had pulled her out of danger more times than she could count, once dragging her by her vest after a suspect blindsided her in an alley. He'd barked her awake when a gas leak filled their cruiser. He was always the one protecting, always the shield. Now, he was too weak to stand. Sarah opened the small box on the shelf where she kept old precinct memorabilia. She dug through photos, badges, training certificates, and pulled out a picture of Max in his prime, alert, proud, wearing that same collar and vest. She placed it gently beside him. His amber eyes blinked slowly, but he didn't move, not even his tail. She made calls that afternoon. Old contacts, friends, former colleagues, but most had moved on, or were juggling their own battles. A few offered sympathy, fewer still asked about Max. No one offered help. The department couldn't fund surgeries for retired K-9s. Not policy, they said. By evening, the sun dipped low, and the living room filled with gold shadows. Sarah opened a file on her computer and searched for funding options. K-9 support foundations, crowdfunding sites, anything. She hated asking, hated the thought of turning Max's story into a plea for money. But she had no choice. She found a rescue organization. Small, grassroots, but known for helping retired working dogs. They had a waiting list, but the director promised to review Max's case overnight. It was the first sliver of hope. Sarah uploaded photos. Max in uniform, Max in training. Max with a little girl he once saved from a collapsed house. She included a short message, fingers trembling as she typed. That night, she sat on the floor beside Max, her back resting against the wall. The vest was draped over her knees. She reached out and placed it beside him. Max's paw shifted just enough to rest on the faded police patch. It was the smallest gesture, but it broke her. Tears slid down her face as she whispered the words she hadn't said since the last day they rode together. "I've got you, partner." Then Max let out a low, shallow whine. Not pain. Something else. He was still fighting. But would the world fight for him in time? Sarah checked her phone before the sun had fully risen. Nothing. No email. No callback. No updates from the rescue fund she had pleaded with. She sat in the dim kitchen, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. In the other room, Max hadn't moved. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His breathing was shallow but steady. Every sound he made, each sigh, each subtle shift, felt louder than thunder. Sarah found herself watching his chest rise and fall as though counting seconds between heartbeats. When the email finally came in, her hands shook as she clicked it open. It was short, direct, and somehow hopeful. Application accepted. Emergency review in progress. One condition. We need the story. Sarah hesitated. Sharing Max's story felt like laying open their past. Every scrape, every victory, every wound. But if it meant saving him, there was no question. She opened a new post on the fundraising page and began to type. She wrote about the night they found a kidnapped toddler in an abandoned warehouse, Max leading the charge through shattered glass. She shared how he refused to retreat when smoke filled the stairwell during a fire call, how he once stood between her and a knife-wielding suspect, refusing to yield. She ended the post with a photo of Max from last week, lying on the living room floor, the vest beside him, eyes dulled but still searching. She hit publish and waited. Hours passed. A few donations trickled in. Then a share, then another. A local news station commented. Someone tagged a police support group. A woman from Colorado posted, saying Max had inspired her son to become a K-9 handler. The story was moving, but the money wasn't enough. Sarah paced the hallway, phone in hand, refreshing the page. It felt like chasing ghosts. Max whimpered once, and she rushed back to him. He had shifted, only slightly, but his paw now rested entirely on the collar, clutching it the way he used to grip her sleeve when anxious. It was as if he knew he was still holding on. That night, Sarah dug through old training logs. Buried beneath paperwork, she found something she had forgotten. Max's original commendation. A certificate, a newspaper clipping, a commendation letter signed by the mayor. The town had once celebrated him like a war hero. She stared at it, and something inside her reignited. Max wasn't just her dog. He was their dog. She scanned the documents and added them to the post. She wrote a final update. He served all of us. Now he needs all of us. It was midnight when the notifications began to explode. Dozens, then hundreds. Donations, shares, comments. Someone tagged a well-known veteran charity. Another offered to match the next $1,000. By dawn, the goal was 80% funded. But time was running out. Surgery couldn't wait much longer, and Max was starting to slip again. Would the help arrive before his heartbeat stopped? The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, as if mocking her with every second that passed. Sarah hadn't slept again. Max had barely moved in hours. His breathing now came in shallow, uneven puffs. His eyes would flutter open briefly, as if searching for something. Then they'd close again, heavy with exhaustion. The fundraiser had nearly reached the full goal, just a few hundred short. People had begun commenting in real time, sharing stories, tagging friends, posting old photos of Max from public events and K9 demos. A former officer who had served with Sarah posted a tribute video, calling Max the bravest partner I ever met. A mother shared how Max once found her daughter during a school lockdown. The world was starting to remember him. But would it be too late? Sarah called the clinic. Dr. Malik answered himself. "I can hold the slot until this afternoon," he said quietly. "But any longer, and we risk losing him before we even open him up." Sarah looked down at Max. His paw still rested on the collar, now slightly askew. The nameplate was smudged, barely legible, but the shape, the badge, was unmistakable. It wasn't just metal. It was memory. It was everything he stood for. She messaged the fundraiser with one last update. Final push. Surgery window closes in hours. He's fading. This is it. Then, almost instantly, it happened. A retired police chief from out of state donated the final amount, and then some. Within minutes, the total surged past the goal. Comments flooded in. Officers from across the country chimed in with thanks, prayers, and old K9 unit photos. One man wrote, "Max once saved my cousin during a burglary. I never forgot his name." Sarah stared at the screen, her hands trembling. She had made the call to Dr. Malik before she even fully processed it. "Bring him in," he said. Now. The drive to the clinic felt like it moved both too fast and not fast enough. Sarah rode with one hand on Max's collar, speaking softly even though he didn't respond. His breathing was faint but steady. The sun cut low across the horizon, casting long golden beams through the windshield. It caught the dog tag just right, making it glint like a medal. Dr. Malik was waiting at the door, surgical staff behind him. No forms, no delays. Max was whisked away gently, the vest folded beside him on the gurney. Sarah stood frozen in the waiting room, holding the collar like a lifeline. She had done all she could. But was it enough? The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the waiting room, mingling with the low hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah sat alone, the only sound her fingers nervously tracing the edges of Max's collar. The tag had cooled now, no longer warmed by his neck, but she held it tightly, as if letting go meant surrender. Dr. Malik had taken Max into surgery minutes ago, but every second stretched like an hour. On the wall behind her, a digital clock ticked rhythmically, cold and detached. Outside, the sky had turned gray, a drizzle tapping faintly against the window pane. Sarah stared at the collar in her hands and remembered the first day she met Max. He was just a pup. Energetic, overzealous, always 10 steps ahead. The first time he wore his training vest, he had strutted around like he was already chief of police. That confidence, that loyalty, had never wavered. Until now, her phone buzzed softly. More notifications. The fundraiser had passed $10,000. Messages of support kept pouring in. Strangers, officers, parents, fellow handlers. Some sent pictures of their own retired K9s. Others simply wrote, We're with Max. One message stood out. A video message from a young boy in uniform holding his own service dog in training. Max is my hero. I want to be just like him one day. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Tears welled up again. Not because of fear, but because she realized something. Max had already left a legacy. He had inspired something beyond service, beyond duty. He had shown what loyalty, courage, and quiet strength looked like. An hour passed, then two. No word from Dr. Malik. Sarah's legs began to tremble as she paced the room. She stopped only to look down the hall, half expecting someone to walk through the doors and tell her it was over. Then the doors opened. Dr. Malik appeared, his scrubs wrinkled, his face lined with fatigue. Sarah stood frozen. He walked up slowly, then gave a tired smile. He made it. The words didn't land right away. She blinked. The damage was worse than we thought, he continued. But we got to it in time. He's not out of the woods yet, but he made it through surgery. Sarah nearly collapsed into the chair behind her. He's going to need rest, weeks of recovery. But if anyone can fight through it, it's Max. They brought her in 10 minutes later, once he was stable. He lay under soft blankets, a bandage across his midsection, tubes and monitors whispering around him. He looked fragile, small, but his chest rose and fell. His ears twitched faintly when he heard her voice. Sarah knelt beside him and placed the collar gently next to his head. "You did it," she whispered. But even as she spoke, a cold thought crept in. The surgery was over, but would Max have the strength or the will to recover? The first few days after surgery were the hardest. Max drifted in and out of sleep, too weak to lift his head, barely responding to touch. The veterinary team did everything they could, monitoring fluids, adjusting medications, keeping his environment calm and quiet. Sarah never left his side. Each morning she draped the service vest over the chair next to his recovery bed. She knew he couldn't wear it yet, but its presence seemed to matter. She would catch his eyes drifting toward it, just for a moment, before he closed them again. The collar stayed beneath his blanket, pressed close to his chest. Time moved slowly, measured in tail twitches and the first flickers of movement. On the fourth day, Max managed to lift his head. On the sixth, he licked Sarah's hand. When the 10th day came and he took his first steps, wobbly, uncertain, but determined, Sarah wept. Word of his progress traveled fast. The fundraiser had grown beyond what anyone expected. The surplus funds were rerouted to help other retired K9s in need. A local news crew visited the clinic, filming a short segment about Max's recovery. The story aired that night, and Sarah watched as images of Max, vested, alert, brave, flashed across the screen, side by side with footage of him taking slow, careful steps down the clinic hallway. The next day, something changed. The precinct called. An officer had seen the segment and reached out to Sarah. They were starting a new community outreach program. Therapy visits, school demonstrations, public engagement. They needed a retired K9 who could help comfort children and bridge trust between officers and civilians. Would Max be interested? Sarah smiled as she looked at him, now curled at her feet, head resting near the vest he once wore in the line of duty. His eyes were clearer now, alert, watching, waiting. A week later, Max walked into the precinct for the first time since retirement. The floor was the same. The scent of coffee and paper and boots still hung in the air. But this time, there was no urgency, no sirens, just warm smiles and open arms. Children gathered in the community room, unsure at first, then reaching out to pet him. Max stood patiently as tiny hands ran through his fur. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. His tail wagged. Sarah watched from the side, the vest tucked neatly around his body. Not tight, not battle-worn, just symbolic now. The collar, freshly polished, caught the light once again. The badge tag glinted gold. He had a new mission. No more doors to break down. No more dark alleys, just moments of healing, of presence, of peace. Later that day, as they sat quietly outside the precinct, Max rested his head in Sarah's lap. She looked down at him and smiled. "You came back," she whispered. "Not just to life, but to purpose." He blinked slowly, eyes steady and calm. And in that moment, Sarah knew. The hero had survived. And now, he was showing the world a different kind of strength. If this rescue moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe for more stories like this.